So there's a weird sense of entitlement with the anti-gun crowd. They think that their position makes them more compassionate. They think they're better than everyone else who thinks that a firearm is just a tool we can use to defend our lives and our freedoms. It's one thing to invoke the name of someone who was murdered in order to make your point. But the anti-gunners feel so entitled to their superiority that they can't even stand that somebody would challenge them. It's unthinkable to them. Doesn't everybody else know that my circumstances as an anti-gun activist make it so that you can never criticize me or my ideas? Hey guys, it's Phil with Gun Owners of America, and you're watching the Minuteman Moment. I'm gonna start off with a quick story about a friend of mine who got into a little bit of a Twitter spat with a fairly well-known anti-gun activist. And then when he was done with that one, an even bigger anti-gun activist jumped into the mix. So this is a story about Nate. He's a friend of mine who works for one of GOA's legendary allies, Congressman Chip Roy. Nate pointed out to a parent of a victim from the Parkland school murders that there is indeed a thing called constitutional carry. You see, the other guy said it was just a marketing scheme. You see, an actual marketing scheme would be like calling an AR-15 an assault weapon or a weapon of war. But it is actually true to call a legal system in which people have the right to carry a firearm pursuant to the state's constitution constitutional carry. Apparently, this was all too much for the gun control activist, prompting an all-caps tirade. All caps! He must really mean business. But again, Congressman Roy's staffer had to point out the obvious. The caps lock can't change the facts, Sparky. If there's one way to knock these self-righteous goons down a peg, it's this way. Don't take them seriously. And for these guys, calling them Sparky was too far. The blue checks on Twitter took off their COVID masks to come to this anti-gunner side, including Chinese spy screwer Eric Swalwell, and the founder of the anti-gun group Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts, and even a co-founder of the grifter group known as the Lincoln Project. Kind of odd that a guy from the Lincoln Project would decide to come out as someone who wants to protect children, since that group has its own pretty sick history with that issue. So those are the players involved. Now let's get to the issue that's behind all of this. Far-left anti-gunners desperately want Americans to believe they don't have a right to keep and bear arms. They like to use tactics like gaslighting, misdirection, arguing on the margins, slippery slope fallacies, and straw men are just some of their tools. But the mother of all bad faith arguments is emotional guilt tripping. Obviously, there's no tragedy worse than losing a loved one, and people use different methods for healing. But the radical left only cares about power, and they will manipulate other people's emotions to get it. There's a reason why we don't put the parents of the victim on juries. If you take away the emotion and look at constitutional arguments, logical premises, and other historical examples, you'll understand that anti-gunners don't have an argument. That's why they want to exploit emotions. We're winning the fight for gun rights throughout the country on things like constitutional carry because people understand that they are physically safer with the means to protect themselves than they are without. They also understand the historical arguments for being armed. And according to a 2013 study by the CDC, which was then controlled by the Obama administration, they found that anywhere from 500,000 to 3 million times guns were used defensively in situations in just 1 year, meaning thousands, possibly even millions of lives were saved every year because lawful gun owners had the right to be armed. Now, if you wanted to get emotional about guns and our rights, this might be a situation in which you support more guns in the hands of Americans since they clearly have a societal benefit. I never want to criticize or insult someone who experienced a tragedy, but if they enter the arena willfully and start slinging mud around, you have the right to fight back, and I'd even say you have the responsibility. If you choose to engage in public debates, you don't get to call on your status to shield yourself from criticism, especially if your ideas directly affect me, my family, or my country. If that person doesn't want any part in the debate, there is no shame in staying out of it. But if you decide to become an anti-gun advocate who thinks the term constitutional carry is just another word for weak, feckless people, then prepare to face some pushback. The Parkland murders were obviously a tragedy that occurred in a gun-free zone. I didn't want it to be a gun-free zone, and neither did anybody at GOA. Anti-gunners like to say that only trained police officers should have guns. But at the school, there was law enforcement who simply refused to use their guns to stop a murderer. Gun control made the murders at Parkland even worse. The same people who supported the gun-free zone laws then don't get to say that guns are the problem. They got exactly what they wanted, the gun-free zones, the strict gun control. Keep in mind, gun grabbers are very selective in what emotions they want to manipulate you with. Anytime there's a murder where a firearm is involved, the issue is rarely about the shooter to them. They always blame the inanimate object, the gun. But you've heard it a million times over and over. Guns don't get up on their own and start shooting. It takes a human with evil intent to misuse them. The founders knew that the right to keep and bear arms was essential because we live in a world with some evil people. Don't forget, leftist progressives think their policies can perfect human beings and usher in a utopia. But we're all imperfect. But if you tell them that, it's going to undermine their policies. So they need to distract you. And one of the best ways of doing that is through emotional manipulation, blaming the gun instead of the murderer and punishing you instead of accepting the presence of evil. Not only does the left want to destroy the Second Amendment by declaring you don't have the right to keep and bear arms, they want to destroy anyone who advocates for it, including legislators like Congressman Chip Roy and anyone associated with him. Thankfully, not only is Congressman Roy a fearless advocate for gun rights, but he surrounds himself with pro-Constitution staff who believe the Constitution is worth fighting for. As we like to say in Washington, staff is policy. So in the end, this video is really about two things. One, you've got to come to help out your friends when they're in trouble. And that's exactly what we did when my buddy got into that little spat with that anti-gunner and all those other anti-gunners on Twitter. But the second thing is for you to be on the lookout for people who want to manipulate you emotionally in order to get a policy win. That's it for this video. We'll see you next time.